I'm sure I'm not supposed to, but sorry, we're breaking protocol here.
You're always good friends.
That's all right. That's the good thing about being president. I can do whatever I want.
U.S. spy planes are now flying over Syria in what could lead to airstrikes on ISIS terror camps there. The drones are gathering intelligence about potential targets as the administration weighs expanded military options against ISIS after the beheading of journalist James Foley. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon with more on this. Jennifer.
John, 2 U.S. defense officials tell me the president signed off on the drone surveillance over Syria in recent days. I'm told the drones will include U.S. Global Hawks and will, for the most part, be unarmed.
But our message to anyone who harms our people is simple. America does not forget. Our reach is long. We are patient. Justice will be done. And we'll continue to take direct action where needed to protect our people and to defend our homeland.
The president has not yet approved airstrikes in Syria. The absence of intelligence over Syria during the past 3 years has hindered the Air Force's ability to conduct targeted airstrikes against ISIS in northern Syria should the president authorize them. Syria's government warned any planes flying over its airspace would need President Bashar Assad's approval, a notion that the State Department rebuffed.
I think when American lives are at stake, when we're talking about defending our own interests, we're not looking for the approval of the Syrian regime.
The Syrian civil war has been raging for more than 2 years, and yet this is the first time the president has authorized the Defense Department to send surveillance drones over Syria, other than to provide support for the failed hostage rescue mission in July. Defense officials explain there just aren't enough drones to go around. In fact, I'm told the military had to pull a drone they were using to look for the missing girls in Nigeria, so they had enough surveillance over Iraq. Until now in Syria, the U.S. military has had to rely on satellite surveillance, which is not nearly as good and has many gaps, John.
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you.
Warnings taking on new added urgency now with those U.S. drones and spy planes flying over Syria today. That after President Obama authorized the surveillance missions. The next step, of course, could be potential airstrikes against ISIS inside Syrian borders. Syria says it is ready to cooperate with any such attacks against the militants, including the U.S. But Syria also demanding that we ask permission, insisting any uncoordinated strikes will be considered aggression. This as we learn Egypt and the United Arab Emirates carried out their own strikes on Libya in the past week. And guess what? They didn't even tell us. Joining us now is John Bolton, former United States ambassador to the UN and a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, first let's start with drones over Syria. Too little, too late?
Well, it's amazing that we haven't been doing this before, number one. And number two, it's even more amazing to me that the president announced he was giving authorization. This is an intelligence matter. He never should have said anything. Why not just give ISIS advance warning of when the drones and planes are coming? But the real problem, I think, is the president still doesn't have a strategy. Does he want to destroy ISIS? Does he want to contain it? And until he decides that, all of this is just tactics now.
Look, the Islamic radical militants, the terrorists, are on the march throughout the whole region. ISIS has taken this huge swath of Iraq and Syria, as big as Jordan. You've got them on the march in Iraq, Syria, Libya. When does it stop, and is it too late to turn the tide?
Well, I think we've been way too late since the fall of Mosul. At a minimum, we should have been doing much, much more. And really, at this point, ISIL's control over the territory it has is not it's not really fully embodied in military control. And I think that means they're vulnerable at this point, and we should be striking them already, but we're doing precious little of that.
What should we have done?
Well, I think we should have been following this situation much more carefully over a much longer period of time. We knew that al-Qaeda in Iraq, in the former version, had begun to reappear inside Iraq. We knew there were extremist forces inside Syria. And the prospect of this coming across the border is something that's been out there for a long time. The president has not focused on the multiple threats in the region, not just ISIS, but the aid that Iran is giving to other terrorist groups around, including Hamas. And the general disintegration we're seeing, I think, is a consequence of the administration simply not paying attention.
You say not paying attention. Look, 3 years ago, there were reports that Hillary Clinton urged the president to try and arm the Syrian rebels, and he refused. He vetoed that. If the president had taken action 3 years ago, do you think potentially we'd be in a different situation now?
Well, maybe, maybe not. Or it may be arming the moderate Syrians back then would have allowed what became ISIS, the radicals, to take the weapons away from them rather than the Iraqi army, which we supplied. I think the president's unwillingness to take on Assad 3 years ago was because of his obsession with negotiating a nuclear deal with Iran, which is keeping the Assad regime in power. And he didn't want to confront Assad because that meant confronting Iran. It shows how difficult the situation is now, where you have not only the Islamic State, a terrorist Sunni organization, as a threat, you still have Iran to worry about simultaneously.
And you talk about that, and those nuclear negotiations are still pushed off. But Catherine Herridge's report about potential attacks here at home. You got 500 or so Brits who they say have joined ISIS, about a dozen Americans. Look, Ambassador, these guys have British and U.S. passports. Can we track each one of them?
No, clearly not. Look, I think we've got a threat now. I think the White House press spokesman was parsing his words very carefully. Currently not an active plot to attack the homeland. I mean, how many phrases like that do you need in there? But look, even granted that maybe the threat isn't urgent right now, the whole point is to prevent the Islamic State from consolidating control over territory so that it can attack us at a later date, which is clearly its objective. They say it over and over again. We ought to take them at their word.
But they just captured an airfield in Syria. They got warplanes and helicopters. I don't know if they know how to fly them. I mean, they're almost like a whole country.
Well, and anti-aircraft equipment, which they probably got from the Iraqi army at Mosul as well. That's why our military is so worried about launching military strikes over Syria. I think we're a long way before this president authorizes it.
Finally, what do you think will happen, and what do you think will happen if the president does not authorize military strikes?
I think the risk right now is that the Islamic State will strengthen its hold over the territory it has now. It has already become a magnet for other terrorists from all over the world. It has economic resources in northern Iraq. It's a threat. It will get worse.
Ambassador John Bolton with a very somber prediction. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
I'm sure I'm not supposed to, but sorry, we're breaking protocol here.
You're always the president.
That's all right. That's the good thing about being president. I can do whatever I want.